I remember that night so vividly, the kind of night that shatters you quietly. My own husband stood under the dim neon lights of our Brooklyn neighborhood bar, joking to a crowd, "If anyone wants my boring wife, I'm taking offers. $1, that's it." The sting of that joke burned worse than I ever expected. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. That evening, I crawled home exhausted from another 12-hour grocery store shift, the damp chill of the East River breeze sneaking through my thin jacket, my feet aching inside worn-out boots. The fluorescent lights of the corner bodega buzzed overhead as I passed, casting harsh shadows that seemed to mirror the emptiness growing inside me. I had hoped for a quiet night with my family, maybe a dinner without the usual tensions, perhaps even a conversation that didn't revolve around what I could give or fix. Instead, I found silence. Coldness thicker than the winter fog that sometimes blankets New York in the early morning hours. The apartment felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in on the life I'd built with my own two hands. The familiar scent of coffee lingered in the air, but it wasn't the comforting smell of home. It was the bitter reminder of another day spent serving everyone but myself. A month earlier, I'd found a framed photo of us, smiling at Coney Island's boardwalk, the salt air filling the frame, our faces bright with the promise of forever. But in reality, that warmth had evaporated like steam rising from a hot cup of coffee on a cold morning. The glass was cracked now, spiderwebbing across our faces like the fractures in my heart. I remember standing in that doorway, my hand trembling as I reached for the light switch. The yellow glow revealed nothing new, the same threadbare couch, the same stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, the same wedding photo that now felt more like evidence of a crime than a celebration of love. But something inside me had shifted that night, something that would change everything. For 35 years, I gave everything. I worked 4 jobs before dawn broke over the Brooklyn Bridge, folding clothes in the back room of Mrs. Chen's laundromat while the subway rumbled overhead, cleaning office buildings in Manhattan's financial district where men in expensive suits stepped over me like I was invisible, cooking in restaurant kitchens where the heat was so intense it felt like breathing fire. All of this so my children could chase their dreams in Brooklyn's relentless hustle. When my eldest, Michael, lost his job last year, I wired him money I didn't have. I remember standing in line at the Western Union on Atlantic Avenue, counting crumpled $20 bills while the cashier looked at me with that mixture of pity and impatience I'd grown accustomed to. The money came from my grocery fund, from the small stash I'd been saving for new winter boots, from the envelope marked "Doctor Visit" that I kept hidden behind the flour canister. I held my tongue during family arguments that could shatter windows, swallowed insults that tasted like poison, and forgave betrayals that left scars deeper than any physical wound. When my daughter Sarah brought her new boyfriend to dinner, she introduced me as the help to make him laugh. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable for them, only for me, standing there with my hands still wet from washing their dishes. "You're too soft, Mom," Sarah once snapped when I asked if she could help with her father's birthday dinner. She said it while scrolling through her phone, not even bothering to look up. The words hit me like a slap across the face, but I just nodded and went back to peeling potatoes, my tears mixing with the starch and cold water. My husband Tom had his own ways of making me feel small. "You're not tired, Ma?" he once asked sharply when I barely caught my breath after carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs, because the elevator in our building had been broken for 6 months. My chest was tight, my knees screaming, but I straightened up and said, "I'm fine," because that's what I always said. Even though my hands trembled as I unpacked the groceries, even though I had to grip the counter to steady myself. But doubt gnawed at me like a persistent toothache. Was I just a utility? A human ATM dispensing cash and care to anyone who asked? A doormat that everyone wiped their feet on before entering the real house where love lived? His jokes became sharper, cutting deeper each time. The coldness between us grew impossible to thaw, like the ice that formed on our fire escape during those brutal New York winters. I started keeping a mental ledger of the things I did versus the things I received. The column on the left grew longer each day: cooking, cleaning, working, paying, fixing, forgiving. The column on the right remained stubbornly empty. Birthdays came and went without mention. He forgot my 55th like it was just another Tuesday. I woke up that morning hoping someone would remember, checking my phone for messages that never came. I made my own birthday coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table, watching the morning light struggle through our grimy window. The only acknowledgement came from the bodega owner who'd seen my ID when I bought lottery tickets, his broken English blessing me with more kindness than my own family could muster. When I got the flu last winter, I was sent to bed alone, nursing a fever that made me feel like I was burning from the inside out. No one checked on me. No one brought me soup or water or even asked if I needed anything. I lay there for 3 days, listening to the sounds of life continuing without me, the television blaring, dishes clattering, conversations flowing around my absence like water around a stone. My prescriptions piled up unfilled because no one offered to pick them up, and I was too weak to make the trip to the pharmacy on Court Street. When I finally confronted Tom about it, he laughed as if I were being dramatic. "You're always sick," he said, dismissing 35 years of taking care of everyone else while ignoring my own needs. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in March. I was cleaning the basement, something I did when I couldn't sleep, when I stumbled upon his phone charging on the workbench. The screen lit up with a text notification, and before I could look away, I saw my name in a thread I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I scrolled through months of messages. Not just jokes, but deep mockery that cut to the bone. "Who'd even want her?" one message said, accompanied by a laughing emoji. "She's like a broken-down car. Still runs, but nobody wants to be seen in it." Another was from someone called Big Money Mike, with a Brooklyn area code. "I heard your old man selling you for $1. I'll give you $1 million if you're willing to disappear." The words blurred through my tears. $1 million. Someone was willing to pay $1 million for me to vanish from my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was worth nothing to my family, but a fortune to a stranger who wanted me gone. I dropped the phone, and it clattered to the concrete floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. My legs gave out, and I sank onto an old milk crate, my chest heaving with silent sobs. Then I heard the crash. A porcelain teacup from my grandmother's collection, the one I'd been holding without realizing, shattered on the floor like my heart. The delicate blue flowers painted on the fragments seemed to mock me. This cup had survived the Great Depression, World War II, my grandmother's death, 3 moves, and countless family gatherings. But it couldn't survive the weight of my grief. That's when I thought it for the first time. No more. I need to say no. The thought terrified me more than being alone, more than losing what little love I thought I had left. But the ache inside me was a war zone. Fear of loneliness battling against the desperate craving for respect, for dignity, for the simple acknowledgement that I was human. I swept up the broken pieces carefully, each fragment cutting my fingers as I tried to put them back together. But some things, once broken, can never be the same. I realized I was looking at a metaphor for my own life, scattered across a basement floor, impossible to repair. I packed away the photo from Coney Island into a cardboard box that night, my hands trembling as I wrapped it in tissue paper. As I sealed the box with tape, I caught my reflection in the basement window, a stranger with hollow eyes, somehow both invisible and painfully exposed. The woman staring back at me looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, broken in a way that time couldn't heal. But there was something else in those eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating fury of someone who'd finally had enough. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I slept until I woke up naturally. No alarm clock, no husband's demands, no schedule but my own. The sun was streaming through the bedroom window when I opened my eyes, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. The house was quiet in a way it never was, peaceful like I couldn't remember it being. I finally confronted him 3 days later. My voice barely above a whisper, I said, "Why do you treat me like I'm invisible?" I was standing in our kitchen, the same place where I'd made thousands of meals, washed millions of dishes, had countless conversations that always seemed to be about everyone else's needs but mine. His face twisted into denial faster than I could blink. "You're imagining things," he said, not even looking up from his newspaper. You're always imagining things. It's probably menopause or something. The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that I realized he'd been perfecting it for years. When I showed him the phone, the messages, the evidence of my humiliation broadcast for entertainment, he shrugged. "Boys will be boys," he said. "You can't take a joke, that's your problem. You never could." My daughter Sarah arrived an hour later, summoned by his frantic phone call. She coldly spat. "You're too sensitive, Mom. Dad's just joking. You always make everything about you." Her words felt like ice water in my veins. Here was my own child, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through midnight fevers, celebrated through every milestone, telling me that my pain didn't matter. My son Michael stood in the doorway, avoiding eye contact like he'd done since he was a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. He mumbled something about both sides and family harmony, but his silence spoke volumes. He'd chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. But then something beautiful happened. Little Emma, my youngest granddaughter, Sarah's 5-year-old daughter, tugged my sleeve gently one afternoon when the arguing had died down to cold stares and passive aggression. "Grammy, you don't have to be sad. I'm here," she whispered, pressing a crayon drawing into my palm. It was a picture of 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with Grammy plus Emma written in purple crayon. She didn't understand the complexity of my pain, the layers of betrayal and neglect that had built up like sediment over the years. But her warmth was a lifeline, a reminder that not all love comes with conditions and price tags. That evening, my neighbor Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door with a plate of food and stories about her late husband's struggles with his own family. She sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, listening without judgment, nodding with understanding, sharing her own heartbreak with the generosity of someone who'd survived similar wounds. "Mija," she said in her mixture of English and Spanish that I'd grown to love, "you teach people how to treat you. If you don't value yourself, why should they?" For the first time in months, I felt seen, not for what I could give or fix or pay for, but for who I was as a person. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with small acts of rebellion that felt enormous to me. Sitting at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning, coffee growing cold in my favorite mug, I made a decision that would change everything. When Tom called from his brother's house, asking for money to fix a debt he'd accumulated gambling at the track in Queens, I said the word that had been trapped in my throat for 35 years. No. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then came the explosion, threats, manipulation, the usual arsenal of emotional weapons he'd been using to control me for decades. But something had shifted in me. The word no tasted like freedom. The next morning, I did something revolutionary. I stayed in my pajamas until noon. I drank coffee slowly, listening to the city stir outside my window. The sounds were the same: car horns, sirens, the rumble of the subway, children playing in the courtyard. But they sounded different somehow, like music instead of noise. I watched Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B hanging laundry on the fire escape, her movements efficient and purposeful. I observed Mr. Park walking his ancient beagle around the block, the same route they'd taken every morning for the past 8 years. These were people living their lives without permission, without apology. When had I forgotten how to do that? That afternoon, I walked to the credit union on Fifth Avenue that I'd been too afraid to visit. The thought of having my own account, money that no one else could access or demand, felt dangerous and thrilling. The young teller, probably no older than Emma would be in 15 years, smiled at me like I was doing something perfectly normal instead of committing an act of revolution. "What type of account would you like to open today, ma'am?" she asked. The word ma'am usually made me feel old, invisible, dismissed, but from her, it sounded respectful, acknowledging. "A savings account," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "Just for me." I deposited the $73 I'd managed to save from my grocery money over the past month. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The bank book they gave me felt like a passport to a country I'd never visited but always dreamed of, the land of financial independence. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in years. No dreams about drowning in debt or disappearing into thin air or being forgotten by everyone I'd ever loved. Just deep, peaceful sleep that left me feeling more rested than I had in decades. I called a counselor the next week, someone Mrs. Alvarez had recommended from her church. Dr. Patricia Williams had an office in Park Slope, in one of those beautiful brownstones that made Brooklyn feel like a small town, instead of part of the biggest city in America. Her waiting room was painted in soft colors that didn't hurt my eyes, and she had plants that looked healthy and cared for. "Tell me about yourself," she said during our first session, and I realized I didn't know how to answer. I'd been a wife, a mother, a worker, a caregiver, a problem solver, a bank account with legs. But myself? That was a stranger I was just beginning to meet. Every step forward felt like a battle, not just against their anger and manipulation, but against my own guilt, my own programming, my own fear of being alone. The voices in my head that sounded like Tom and Sarah and Michael told me I was being selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. But Dr. Williams taught me to recognize those voices as echoes from the past, not truths about the present. "You've been trained to believe that your worth is tied to your usefulness," she explained during our third session. "But that's not love. That's exploitation dressed up in family clothing." The words hit me like a physical blow because they were so obviously true. I'd been confusing being needed with being loved, mistaking dependency for affection. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. Months passed. I established routines that belonged to me. Morning walks in Prospect Park, afternoon visits to the Central Library, evening phone calls with Mrs. Alvarez that could last for hours. I started reading books I chose for myself, instead of the romance novels Tom always said were trash for bored housewives. I discovered mysteries, biographies, books about women who'd found their strength later in life. I bought clothes that fit properly instead of making do with hand-me-downs and clearance items. Nothing expensive or flashy, but things that made me feel put together instead of invisible. A blue sweater that brought out my eyes, comfortable shoes that didn't pinch my feet, a scarf that Mrs. Rodriguez complimented when she saw me wearing it. The family noticed the changes, of course. They began with subtle questions. Where was I going? Why wasn't I answering my phone immediately? Why hadn't I called to check on various crises that somehow always required my intervention? The questions became demands. The demands became threats, and the threats became the kind of family drama I'd spent decades trying to avoid. But I was different now, stronger in ways that surprised even me. The final confrontation came at Thanksgiving, 6 months after I'd started saying no, after I'd begun treating myself like someone worth saving. The family gathered at Sarah's house in Bay Ridge, a beautiful brownstone she'd been able to afford, partly because of the down payment money I'd given her 3 years earlier. The house was decorated like something from a magazine, orange and gold leaves scattered artfully across the dining room table, expensive candles flickering in silver holders, a centerpiece that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Everything looked perfect, which is exactly how Sarah liked her life to appear. But appearances, I'd learned, could be deceiving. I arrived with a single dish, my grandmother's stuffing recipe that everyone always requested but never thanked me for. I wasn't playing the role of family caterer anymore, despite the pointed comments about the light spread and how some people weren't contributing like they used to. The tension in the room was thicker than the gravy Sarah had bought from Whole Foods, but pretended to have made herself. Everyone was performing their usual roles. Tom holding court with stories that got more exaggerated each year. Michael checking his phone constantly to avoid meaningful conversation. Sarah orchestrating everything with military precision while complaining about how much work it all was. But I wasn't performing anymore. When Tom started telling the story about the boring wife joke to Sarah's in-laws, expecting his usual audience of nervous laughter, I stood up. In front of everyone, I walked to the mantelpiece where Sarah had displayed family photos in expensive frames. I picked up the largest one, the 4 of us at Coney Island. The same photo I'd looked at so many times with longing and regret. The room went quiet except for the sound of the football game playing on the television in the living room. Everyone watched as I held the photo for a moment, remembering the woman in the picture who'd believed that love was enough, that family was everything, that sacrifice would eventually be rewarded with appreciation. Then I tore it slowly, deliberately, down the middle. The sound of paper ripping seemed to echo through the entire house. Tom jumped up, his face red with anger and embarrassment. He tried to snatch the pieces from my hands, but I held firm. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. "Have you lost your mind?" "I will no longer buy love," I said quietly, making sure my voice carried to every corner of that perfectly decorated room. "Respect me or lose me." The silence that followed was different from the usual uncomfortable pauses in our family gatherings. This wasn't the hush of people avoiding conflict. This was the stunned quiet of people realizing that the rules had changed, that the game they'd been playing had a new player who refused to lose. Sarah's face was a mask of fury and embarrassment. Her perfect Thanksgiving was ruined, and in front of her husband's parents no less. "Mom, you're being ridiculous," she hissed. "We're family. We love you." But I was looking at Emma, who was watching everything with wide eyes from her spot on the floor where she'd been coloring. She didn't understand the adult complications, but she knew something important was happening. She stood up and walked over to me, slipping her small hand into mine. "Grammy's not sad anymore," she announced to the room with the clarity that only children possess. "She looks different, happier." For the first time in that house, in that family, in years, I felt the tremors of real power. Not the kind that comes from manipulation or control or money, but the kind that comes from knowing your own worth, from understanding that you don't have to accept scraps and call it love, don't have to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. Tom was still ranting about respect and ingratitude, and how I was embarrassing the family. Sarah was crying angry tears that had nothing to do with hurt and everything to do with losing control. Michael was trying to mediate with empty words about how we all needed to calm down and work things out. But I was calm, calmer than I'd been in decades. I squeezed Emma's hand and picked up my purse, leaving the torn photo on the coffee table like evidence of a crime finally solved. "I'm going home," I said. "Emma, would you like to visit me next weekend? We could go to the aquarium." She nodded eagerly, and I kissed the top of her head before walking toward the door. Behind me, the family erupted into arguments and blame, and the kind of dramatic chaos they'd always expected me to clean up. But I kept walking, just when I thought the storm had passed, just when I believed I'd finally found my footing in this new life I was building. They pulled out their most devastating weapon, public humiliation. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I woke up to 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I scrolled through them, each one more vicious than the last. Someone had created a fake social media account using my name and photo, posting a rambling apology that made me sound mentally unstable. The post claimed I'd been having a breakdown and was seeking help for my delusions. It thanked everyone for their patience with my recent erratic behavior, and promised I was working with medical professionals to address my issues. The language was just believable enough, just pathetic enough to be convincing. Within hours, it had been shared hundreds of times. My neighbors, my coworkers, people from church, everyone in my small corner of Brooklyn was seeing this fabricated version of my mental collapse. The comments were a mixture of sympathy and judgment, with a few people who knew me well expressing doubt, but most accepting it as truth. The cruelest part was how perfectly it aligned with the narrative they'd always preferred, that I was the problem, that my quest for dignity was actually evidence of instability, that my refusal to accept mistreatment was a symptom of something broken in me rather than something finally healed. Tom's friends from the bar were having a field day in the comments section, making jokes about crazy wives and sharing stories about their own domestic dramas. Sarah had shared the post with a heartbroken emoji and a comment about supporting family through difficult times. Michael had simply liked several of the more sympathetic responses, positioning himself as the long-suffering son of an unstable mother. For a moment, the old me surfaced, the woman who would have called them immediately, begging them to take it down, promising to be good, to be quiet, to go back to the way things were. The shame was overwhelming, hot and thick in my throat like I was drowning in it. But then I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and instead of the broken woman I'd expected to see, I found someone different. Someone who'd survived 35 years of being diminished and dismissed. Someone who'd found the strength to say no and mean it. Someone who would not be cowed by lies, no matter how public or painful. I didn't respond to the post. I didn't call them. I didn't defend myself against accusations that anyone who truly knew me would recognize as false. Instead, I took a deep breath and did something revolutionary. I trusted people to see the truth, and I accepted that those who couldn't or wouldn't weren't people whose opinions mattered. Mrs. Alvarez was the first to call with support instead of questions. "Mija, I know this isn't you," she said simply, "but now you know who your real family is and isn't." Dr. Williams helped me understand that this was the final test, the last desperate attempt to drag me back into a system that required my silence and compliance to function. "They're showing you exactly who they are," she said during our emergency session that week. "Believe them." And slowly, surprisingly, the world didn't collapse around me. The people who mattered, Mrs. Alvarez, Emma when she visited, my co-workers who actually knew me instead of just knowing about me, they saw through the lies. The others, the ones who were so eager to believe the worst about me, revealed themselves as people whose respect wasn't worth having anyway. The fake post eventually disappeared, deleted by someone in the family when it became clear it was backfiring. But the damage to their credibility was done. People had seen how far they were willing to go to control me, and it wasn't a good look for any of them. I was no longer the woman who broke teacups in basement despair. This was the woman who could weather a storm of lies and come out standing, who could face public humiliation and find her dignity intact, who could choose silence over self-defense because she finally understood her own worth. Spring came early that year, or maybe I was just more aware of it. Instead of spending every waking moment working, worrying, or fixing other people's problems, I had time to notice things. The way the morning light hit the fire escape outside my bedroom window, creating patterns on the wall that shifted like living art. The sound of children playing in the courtyard below, their laughter rising up like music. The smell of Mrs. Chen's laundry detergent drifting from the basement, clean and hopeful. I bought myself a paint set from the art supply store on Court Street. Nothing fancy, just basic watercolors and brushes and paper, but it felt like the most luxurious purchase I'd ever made. The salesman, a young man with paint under his fingernails and kindness in his eyes, spent 20 minutes explaining different types of paper and brush techniques like I was a real artist instead of a 60-year-old woman playing with toys. My small Brooklyn apartment began to transform. Where once there had been only family photos and practical furniture, colorful canvases started appearing on the walls. Abstract swirls that captured the chaos of learning to live again. Landscape attempts that looked more like emotional explosions than actual places. Portraits of Emma that somehow managed to capture her spirit even when the proportions were all wrong. The painting wasn't good, objectively speaking, but it was mine. Every brushstroke was a choice I made for myself. Every color a reflection of feelings I was finally allowed to have. The act of creating something purely for my own joy felt revolutionary. I reconnected with old friends over walks in Prospect Park. Women I'd lost touch with during the years when every spare moment was consumed by family obligations and financial worry. Some of them had stories similar to mine. Marriages that had become prisons. Children who saw them as resources rather than people. Decades of putting everyone else first, until they forgot who they were underneath all that service. We walked the paths around the lake, sharing our stories and our carefully guarded dreams. Maria, who'd started taking dance classes at 68. Janet, who'd gone back to school to become a paralegal after her divorce. Rosa, who'd started a small catering business from her apartment kitchen and was making more money than she'd ever earned working for other people. Their laughter warmed me in ways I'd forgotten were possible. These were women who knew the price of freedom, who understood that sometimes love requires leaving, that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. I enrolled in a night class on photography at the community college. The idea of learning something new, something just for me, felt both terrifying and thrilling. The first night, I sat in the back row with my secondhand camera, feeling like an imposter among the younger students with their expensive equipment and casual confidence. But the teacher, Professor Martinez, had the gift of making everyone feel capable. Photography isn't about the camera. he said during that first class. It's about seeing. It's about finding beauty in unexpected places, capturing moments that matter, learning to look at the world with fresh eyes. Over the weeks, I discovered I had an eye for detail, for finding extraordinary moments in ordinary scenes. I photographed the way morning light transformed the bodega on the corner into something almost magical. The hands of elderly men playing dominoes in the park, their fingers telling stories of decades of work and worry and joy. Emma's face when she discovered a butterfly in my tiny garden on the fire escape, her expression pure wonder. Each photograph was proof of a life being lived instead of merely endured, evidence that I was becoming someone new while reclaiming someone I'd almost lost. My wardrobe slowly changed too. Not dramatically. I wasn't trying to look like someone half my age or pretend to be someone I wasn't. But I replaced the worn-out clothes that had made me feel invisible with things that fit properly, colors that didn't wash me out, fabrics that felt good against my skin, a royal blue sweater that Mrs. Rodriguez complimented, comfortable jeans that actually fit my hips, a winter coat that was both warm and flattering instead of just functional. Small changes that made me feel more present in my own body, more deserving of space in the world. My posture changed too, straightening from the hunched, defensive position I'd carried for so many years. When I walked down the street, I looked up instead of down, met people's eyes instead of avoiding them, moved through the world like someone who had a right to be there. Emma noticed the changes immediately during one of our weekend visits. "Grammy, you stand up taller now," she observed with the directness that only children possess. "And you smile different, like you really mean it." She was right. The smiles weren't performed anymore, weren't desperate attempts to keep the peace or make others comfortable. They were real expressions of genuine contentment, small celebrations of moments worth celebrating. Our relationship deepened into something more honest and reciprocal. Instead of me always giving and her always receiving, we became real friends who enjoyed each other's company. I taught her to paint watercolor flowers. She taught me to use the camera on my phone to take selfies that captured our silly moments together. "When I grow up, I want to be strong like you, Grammy," she said one Saturday afternoon as we sat in Prospect Park, sharing a soft pretzel and watching people walk by with their dogs. "You already are strong, sweetheart," I told her. "But remember, being strong doesn't mean never needing help. It means knowing you're worth helping." 6 months later, I sit by my kitchen window as the sun sets over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that look like hope feels. The old tenement buildings across the street cast long shadows, but they don't look oppressive anymore. They look like part of a neighborhood full of stories, full of lives being lived in all their messy, beautiful complexity. The view from my window includes the fire escape where I've created a small garden in recycled pots, herbs and flowers that didn't exist when I was spending all my energy on other people's needs. The basil will make perfect pesto this summer. The marigolds attract butterflies that Emma loves to photograph when she visits. I pour myself a glass of wine. Not expensive wine, but wine that I chose because I liked the label, because the woman at the liquor store recommended it, because I wanted to mark the end of another day that belonged to me. It tastes like freedom, complex and mature and worth savoring slowly. My relationship with Emma continues to flourish. She spends every other weekend with me now, something we negotiated directly with Sarah without involving lawyers or drama. Sarah wasn't happy about it initially, but she's come to appreciate having child-free weekends, and Emma's obvious joy during our time together makes it hard to argue against. The rest of the family has developed a cautious distance. They're not sure how to handle this new version of me, someone who doesn't automatically say yes to every request, who doesn't apologize for having boundaries, who treats herself like someone worth protecting. Tom still tries manipulation occasionally, but it bounces off me like rain off an umbrella. Michael calls sometimes, awkward conversations where he clearly wants to ask for something, but isn't sure how to approach someone who might say no. I listen patiently and offer emotional support when appropriate, but I don't rush to solve all his problems or pretend that money will fix what's broken in his life. Sarah and I have reached a tentative peace. We're not close. Too much damage has been done for that. But we're civil when Emma's involved, and she's stopped the outright disrespect that used to characterize our interactions. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. The fake social media incident turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront how much power I'd been giving to other people's opinions, how much anxiety I'd been carrying about being liked versus being respected. Now I know the difference between people who care about me and people who simply want to control me. My work life has changed too. I'm still at the grocery store, but I've moved to part-time, giving me space to breathe and think and pursue interests that don't revolve around earning money for other people's needs. The reduction in income was scary at first, but I've discovered that I actually need less money when I'm not constantly trying to buy love or solve other people's financial problems. Mrs. Alvarez and I have become real friends, the kind who show up for each other without keeping score. When she was sick with bronchitis last month, I brought her soup and stayed to watch novelas with her. When I was considering adopting a cat from the shelter, she helped me research different breeds and drove me to look at potential pets. I did adopt that cat, by the way, a senior orange tabby named Walter who'd been returned to the shelter 3 times for being too independent. We're perfect for each other. 2 creatures who value autonomy and aren't interested in performing affection for anyone's convenience. Walter sleeps on my bed now, a warm presence that asks for nothing but offers companionship. He purrs when I paint, sits in the window when I read, and has never once demanded that I sacrifice my well-being for his comfort. The relationship is everything human relationships should be but often aren't. Mutual respect, genuine affection, and healthy boundaries. Dr. Williams and I still meet monthly, less for crisis management and more for ongoing emotional maintenance. She's helped me understand that healing isn't a destination but a process, that growing stronger doesn't mean the scars disappear. It means they become evidence of survival rather than sources of shame. You've built something beautiful, she told me during our last session. Not just a new life, but a new relationship with yourself. That's the foundation everything else is built on. The photography class led to a photography club, which led to weekend trips around New York City with other amateur photographers. Last month, we went to the High Line, and I captured a series of images of wildflowers growing through cracks in concrete, resilient beauty emerging from unlikely places. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. I'm learning that New York is full of stories like mine, people who found themselves later in life, who discovered strength they didn't know they had, who chose dignity over desperation and found that the world didn't collapse around them. Every face I photograph tells a story of someone who's survived something, who's found reasons to keep going, who's learned that happiness is an inside job. My photography has gotten better with practice. Some of my images have been displayed in the community college's student gallery. Nothing earth-shattering, but seeing my work on a wall, properly framed and lit, felt like validation that I was becoming who I was always meant to be. The old scars still ache sometimes, especially on gray winter days when loneliness feels heavier than usual. But they're no longer chains. They're the marks of survival, proof that I lived through something difficult and came out whole on the other side. Those shattered photos, the ones I packed away in boxes or tore up in moments of rage, used to represent loss. Now they're relics of liberation, evidence that I was brave enough to let go of a story that was destroying me, even when I didn't know what story would replace it. Life taught me that worth isn't given by others. It's recognized by yourself and protected fiercely. That love without respect is manipulation. That family isn't defined by blood, but by behavior. That it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Emma drew me another picture last weekend. The 2 of us standing in front of the aquarium, smiling under a rainbow that takes up half the paper. At the bottom, in her careful kindergarten handwriting, she wrote, "Grammy is happy now." I have it framed on my kitchen table, right next to the plant I bought myself and the book I'm reading for pleasure. The sunset tonight is particularly beautiful. Streaks of gold and rose painting the sky above Brooklyn like God's own watercolor. I raise my glass of wine to the window, toasting another day of living instead of just surviving, another day of choosing myself without apology. But let me tell you about last Tuesday, because that's when I truly understood how much I'd changed. I was walking through the Fort Greene Farmers Market, something I'd started doing as part of my new routine of small pleasures and conscious choices. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh apples and the last roses of the season. I was selecting vegetables for a soup I planned to make just for myself, not because anyone required it, not because it was my duty, but because I wanted to. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Excuse me, aren't you Tom's wife?" I turned to see Patricia Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter from the laundromat where I used to work those pre-dawn hours, folding other people's intimates in the humid back room while my own life fell apart piece by carefully washed piece. She looked exactly the same. Neat professional clothes, perfectly styled hair, the kind of put-together appearance that comes from having your own money and your own choices. "I used to be," I said simply, selecting a butternut squash and weighing it in my hands. The weight felt substantial, promising, like the foundations of something nourishing. She paused, confusion flickering across her face. "Used to be? I'm just me now," I explained, placing the squash gently in my canvas bag, a bag I'd bought for myself from the local bookstore, sturdy and beautiful with an image of the Brooklyn Bridge printed in blue ink. "I'm Marianne. Just Marianne." We chatted for a few minutes about nothing particularly important. The weather, the market, how much Brooklyn had changed over the years. But what struck me wasn't the conversation itself, but how I felt during it. Steady, present, like someone who belonged in her own life. As I walked away, I caught my reflection in the window of the cheese vendor's stall. The woman looking back at me had silver streaking through her hair that I'd stopped dyeing to hide my age. She wore jeans that fit properly, and a jacket that I'd chosen because I liked the color, not because it was practical or on sale, or would hide the stains from taking care of everyone else. But more than that, she looked like someone you'd want to know, someone with stories worth hearing, opinions worth considering, time worth sharing. She looked like someone who'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being needed and being valued, between existing and living. That evening, I called my sister Carmen in Puerto Rico, something I'd rarely done during the years when every minute of my life belonged to someone else's crisis. Carmen and I had grown apart during my marriage, not from any argument or falling out, but from the simple reality that I'd had no emotional energy left for relationships that didn't demand 18 hours of my day. "Hi, Marie," she said, her voice warm with surprise and something that sounded like relief. "I was just thinking about you. How are you, mija?" For the first time in decades, I knew how to answer that question honestly. "I'm good, Carmen. Really good. Different, but good." We talked for 3 hours. 3 hours of conversation that meandered through memories and dreams and the small details of daily life that make up the texture of sisterhood. She told me about her granddaughter's quinceañera, her struggles with arthritis, her pride in finally learning to drive at 72. I told her about Emma and Walter and my photography class and the way the light looks different when you're not constantly running toward the next crisis. "You sound like yourself again," she said before we hung up. "Like the Mari I remember from before. You know, I knew. Before I disappeared into someone else's version of who I should be. Before I traded my identity for the promise of belonging that never quite materialized. Before I learned to make myself smaller so others could feel larger. The changes weren't just internal, though they started there. My apartment began to reflect this new version of myself, not through expensive renovations or dramatic makeovers, but through small, deliberate choices that honored my own taste instead of everyone else's comfort. I replaced the heavy curtains that Tom had preferred because they blocked out too much light, with sheer panels that let the morning sun stream across my kitchen table. I bought flowers for myself every other week. Nothing extravagant. Usually just a small bouquet from the corner market. But having fresh colors and live beauty in my space felt like a weekly declaration that I deserved lovely things, even when no one else was there to see them. I rearranged the furniture to create a reading corner by the window, with a comfortable chair and good lamp and a small table for my coffee, and whatever book was currently transforming my understanding of the world. This corner became my sanctuary, the place where I read about other women who'd found themselves later in life, about artists who'd started painting in their 70s, about the science of resilience and the psychology of self-worth. The bookshelves that had once held only practical volumes, cookbooks and home repair manuals and financial planning guides, slowly filled with poetry and memoirs and mysteries and books about photography and travel and all the subjects that had interested me before I learned to be interested only in other people's needs. One particularly meaningful addition was a small wooden box where I kept Emma's drawings, and the letters from Carmen, and the photography class certificates, and other tangible proof that I was building a life worth documenting. This box sat on the dresser where the family photos used to be, a physical reminder that my story was still being written, and I was finally the author instead of just a supporting character. The winter came and went differently than it had in previous years. Instead of dreading the gray months as a time when seasonal depression would compound my family-induced despair, I found myself appreciating the quiet beauty of the season. I took photographs of snow-covered fire escapes, of the way ice formed patterns on windows, of people bundled in colorful scarves hurrying through Washington Square Park with purpose and determination. Walter and I developed our own winter routines. He would curl up on my lap while I painted in the afternoons, his purr a constant vibration of contentment. We'd both dozed in the reading chair, surrounded by the peculiar peace that comes from being exactly where you belong, with exactly who you choose to be with. I started volunteering at the local senior center, helping other women learn basic computer skills and navigate social media. Many of them were widows, adjusting to sudden independence after decades of marriage. Others were like me, women who'd spent their lives caring for everyone else, and were now learning to care for themselves. Teaching them how to email their grandchildren or research their interests online, or even just change their Facebook profile pictures gave me a sense of purpose that was entirely different from the exhausting utility I'd provided my family. This was service that was appreciated, reciprocal, and freely given rather than demanded and taken for granted. One of my students, Dorothy, was 83 and had never touched a computer before her husband died the previous spring. She'd been married for 62 years to a man who handled all the technical stuff and left her feeling helpless when dealing with anything more complicated than a television remote. "I never thought I was smart enough for these machines," she confided during our third lesson, her arthritis-gnarled fingers carefully hovering over the keyboard as she composed her first email to her daughter in California. "Intelligence has nothing to do with it," I told her, remembering all the times I'd been made to feel stupid for not understanding things no one had ever bothered to teach me. "It's just learning new skills. You've been learning new skills your whole life. This is just another one." When she successfully sent that first email and immediately received a delighted response from her daughter, complete with photos of her great-grandchildren that she'd never seen, tears streamed down both our faces. We hugged like old friends, celebrating a shared victory because, in a way, that's exactly what we were. These women became an unexpected source of strength and wisdom. They shared stories of transformation that made my own journey feel less unique and more universal. There was something powerful about being in a room full of women who'd all discovered, at various points in their lives, that it was never too late to begin again. Spring brought new energy and new possibilities. I signed up for a weekend photography workshop in the Hudson Valley, my first trip outside of New York City in years that wasn't related to a family emergency or obligation. The idea of spending money on something purely for my own enjoyment still felt revolutionary, but I was getting more comfortable with small acts of revolution. The workshop was held at a renovated farmhouse surrounded by meadows and streams, and the kind of pastoral beauty that reminds you why people make art in the first place. For 2 days, I woke up when my body felt rested, ate meals prepared by someone else, and spent hours learning to see light and shadow and composition through the lens of a camera. The other participants ranged from serious amateur photographers to complete beginners like myself. We were all united by curiosity and the desire to capture beauty, to preserve moments that mattered, to develop our eyes as well as our technical skills. I photographed an old stone wall covered with moss and lichen, the way morning dew caught on spider webs stretched between fence posts, a mother duck leading her ducklings across a pond that reflected clouds and sky like a mirror. Each image was a small meditation on resilience, on the beauty that emerges when living things adapt to their circumstances, on the profound satisfaction of creating something with your own hands and your own vision. But the most important photograph I took that weekend was one the instructor, Sophia, snapped of me without my knowledge. She caught me in a moment of complete absorption, crouched beside that stone wall with my camera, completely focused on finding the perfect angle to capture how the afternoon light was transforming ordinary moss into something magical. When she showed me the image later, I barely recognized myself. This wasn't the hunched, apologetic woman I'd been for so many years. This was someone engaged with her environment, confident in her right to be there, lost in the simple joy of discovery. This was someone who looked like she belonged in her own life. I keep that photograph on my refrigerator now, next to Emma's latest drawing and a postcard from Carmen's recent trip to see the Northern Lights. It serves as a daily reminder of who I'm becoming, of the person who was always there underneath all those years of serving everyone else's needs. The workshop also introduced me to the concept of artists' retreats, longer trips where people go specifically to focus on their creative work, away from the distractions and demands of daily life. The idea fascinated and terrified me in equal measure. Could I really spend a week somewhere, doing nothing but photography and reading and thinking and creating? Could I justify that kind of self-indulgence? But as I learned more about these retreats, often affordable, sometimes specifically designed for beginners, usually filled with supportive people on similar journeys, I began to see them not as indulgences, but as investments in the person I was becoming. Dr. Williams had always emphasized the importance of nurturing the parts of myself that had nothing to do with being useful to other people. I started saving for a week-long photography retreat in Vermont, scheduled for the following autumn. Every dollar I put into that special savings account felt like a vote of confidence in my own future, proof that I believed I was worth investing in. Meanwhile, my relationship with Emma continued to deepen in ways that surprised both of us. Now 8 years old, she was developing her own interests and opinions, and our time together became less about me entertaining her, and more about us exploring the world together as equals. She became fascinated with the photography I'd been learning, begging to use my camera during our outings. I bought her a simple digital camera of her own for her birthday. Not expensive, but real enough that she took it seriously. Watching her experiment with different angles and subjects, seeing the world through her young eyes, reminded me that curiosity and creativity aren't childish things to be outgrown, but essential qualities to be cultivated throughout life. "Grammy, look how the light makes patterns on the sidewalk," she said one Saturday afternoon as we walked through Brooklyn Bridge Park. She was crouched down with her camera, capturing the way tree shadows created intricate designs on the concrete beneath our feet. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. What made you notice that?" "You always look at light differently now," she said matter-of-factly. "Like it's important." So I started looking at it too. Her observation hit me with unexpected force. I had become someone who looked at light differently, who noticed beauty in ordinary moments, who approached the world with curiosity instead of resignation. And without realizing it, I was modeling something valuable for this little girl, who would grow up knowing that transformation was possible at any age. Our conversations grew more sophisticated as she matured. She asked me about my paintings, about why I'd started taking pictures, about what it felt like to live alone. Her questions weren't intrusive. They came from genuine interest in who I was as a person, not just as her grandmother. "Were you always sad before?" she asked one day as we sat in my reading corner, sharing hot chocolate and looking through photography books. "Not always," I said carefully. "But I forgot how to be happy for a while. I forgot that my feelings mattered too." "I'm glad you remembered," she said simply, leaning against my shoulder as she turned the pages of a book about nature photography. These moments with Emma became touchstones, reminders of why the difficult work of transformation had been worthwhile. She was growing up with the example of a woman who'd chosen herself, who'd refused to accept mistreatment, who'd rebuilt her life from the ground up. Whatever challenges she would face as an adult, she'd know that change was possible, that self-respect wasn't selfish, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. The relationship with the rest of my family remained complicated but manageable. Tom had found a new girlfriend, someone 20 years younger who seemed impressed by his stories and amused by his jokes. I felt nothing but relief when I heard the news through mutual acquaintances. Someone else could be the audience for his performances now. Sarah had started therapy, something she mentioned casually during one of our rare phone conversations. I didn't ask for details, but I hoped she was beginning to examine some of the patterns that had shaped our relationship. Whether or not she was ready to acknowledge and apologize for the damage she'd caused, I was glad she was getting professional help. Michael had found a new job and seemed to be building a more stable life. He sent occasional text messages, nothing deep or emotionally meaningful, but regular enough that I knew he was okay. We'd probably never have the close relationship I'd once hoped for, but at least the active hostility had faded into something more like benign distance. The most significant development was that I'd stopped waiting for apologies that might never come, stopped hoping for acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused, stopped needing their approval or understanding to validate my choices. Their opinion of me had become irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. This freedom from their judgment opened up emotional space for new relationships and deeper connections with people who actually appreciated my company. The photography group became a source of genuine friendship. The volunteer work introduced me to women with fascinating stories and hard-earned wisdom, even casual acquaintances. The librarian who recommended books, the man at the farmer's market who saved the best tomatoes for regular customers, the neighbor who always asked about Walter, became part of a web of positive connections that replaced the toxic family dynamics I'd finally escaped. 2 years after that night when I broke down in the basement, holding shattered pieces of my grandmother's teacup and my own broken dreams, I was living a completely different life. Not perfect, no life ever is, but honest, authentic, mine. I'd learned to distinguish between loneliness and being alone, between love and manipulation, between family and people who shared my DNA but not my values. I'd discovered that self-respect wasn't selfish but essential, that boundaries weren't walls but bridges to healthier relationships, that saying no to the wrong things created space to say yes to the right ones. Most importantly, I'd learned that transformation doesn't require anyone's permission, approval, or understanding. It only requires the courage to believe you're worth saving, even when no one else seems to agree. Have you ever lived or known someone who lived something like this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, taken for granted by the people who should treasure you most? Have you ever wondered if it's possible to reclaim your dignity after decades of giving it away piece by piece? Please share your story in the comments. Your experience matters, your pain is valid, and your healing is possible. If this moved you, if it reminded you that you're worth more than scraps and called it love, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps my voice reach other hearts that need to hear these words, other people who are still learning that it's never too late to choose yourself. Remember, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. You don't have to accept mistreatment and call it family. Your story isn't over. Your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of it. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to stop accepting less than you deserve. The sunset is almost over now, but tomorrow there will be another one, and another day to choose dignity over desperation, respect over resentment, real love over the counterfeit version that costs too much and delivers too little. You are worth the real thing. Never forget that.